Well, welcome to the Mrs. R Relevant Daily Draft Podcast. I am joined by Randall and Owen. We've all got the draft professor gear going, so that made me smile here as we started the podcast. But Owen, how are you doing?
You know, I was doing better today, not so much. We're still sick from when me and you did our draft day 2 live stream, but we're slowly hoping to get over this by at least by this weekend. So, this is my first thing I'm using my voice for all day. So I saved it just especially for you, Jim.
Well, thank you. Are you all done with finals or?
Finals week is next week. I have 4 of them, but I'm not too worried about it. The senioritis has really bit me in the ass at this point. Where I've done all this, I've done a bunch of work where as long as I don't get like a 0 in any of them, I should be fine.
Hey, way to set yourself up then.
Cool. And Randall, how are things with you?
Oh man, they are good. It's been nice out. The Knicks are up by 9 right now, so let's hope that trend goes because I can't watch a game 7 with them.
And Buffalo drafted one of your guys.
I know. I love it. The fortunate thing with that is I'm gonna go shopping for a Landon Jackson jersey locally, and what I'm seeing is like 75% discount since he got drafted, and there's not a lot of Bills fans here, so I'm gonna go hunting like crazy. I'll get your size.
Their draft class as a whole had a bunch of players I just absolutely loved in this class.
Yes. I now officially love TJ Sanders, so I'm on the TJ Sanders train. I know for the world I was not, and I apologize. And I do like him, and I like the way he fits Buffalo's system so well that I'm glad TJ came to Buffalo because I think he's going to excel in our system.
Yeah,
between him, Buffalo kicked ass with the draft.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah,
they did.
Yeah.
I was a big Hairston guy, so I was happy with that, and then just kept going because I also love Hawes and Strong, and I'm a big fan of Landon Jackson, so they just kept hitting.
Yes, the only reason I had him a little bit lower on that board was that character question, and once Bean said that on the podium, and that came out, then I'm all like 100% full, and like his character and who he is. Oh man, it's so exciting. Sorry. And then we get Elijah Moore, and everybody in the wide receiver department is now happy, which is unreal, but I digress.
Well, it's interesting. Did you guys see Brandon Beane on Pat McAfee?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I watched the whole interview.
Yep.
Okay. So what I heard was Beane said we didn't see a receiver on the board that was going to be top 4 on our team. Did you hear him say that?
Yeah, and that was so when we were in our Buffalo Bills draft our mock draft room for the Epic mock. That was kind of thing I was arguing for against going with an early wide receiver was that where were you going to slot in a player like touches wise or targets wise in your top 4 between Kincaid, Keon, Jordan Palmer, Khalil Shakir? There was nobody you were going to draft that was going to break into that top 4, and you're not even including the running backs as a collective. The rest of the targets, and you go to Dawson Knox, and some of your like Curtis Samuel's going to get some touches if healthy, and so you have a bunch of guys there that need targets, even though it's more spread out than it was when we had Diggs. I didn't see anybody who could crack early into that lineup to be able to get targets early on, and it was reflective of that.
Right, and it's almost like a political divide for Bills Mafia because you can't get for people on that side that wanted the wide receiver early, pretty much 99% of the people don't believe in Kincaid or Keon Coleman already, sort of thing. And that's what kind of like makes that divide. And I'm fully on the board of Keon Coleman's 21 and deserves a second year, especially after a wrist injury and things along those lines. So that's where the divide is the either love or hate for Keon and Dalton Kincaid.
He's 21 and was a split athlete in college. Like he split his time between basketball and football, had one full season of being a college football athlete, and was the first pick in the second round. And he's 21, was ramping up, was having a good couple games there. Like the Seattle game, people will soon forget, people were talking about, oh, he's elite now. And then he gets his wrist broken by Jordan Poyer, and then it goes down. People are just off the ship for him now.
Well, and what I like about Keon Coleman is he has the body type that ages well.
Yes.
Like when I was looking at the draft last year, like I said, okay, Xavier Worthy is the type of receiver you don't give a second contract to. Because if you're a fast receiver and you get old, you're no longer fast. But if you're a big receiver and you get old, you're still big.
Yep.
Right. I've also heard that same logic with running backs. A big running back will age better than a faster running back because a big running back will always be big.
Yeah, it's a good point.
So I look at Keon Coleman as if he's 50 to 60 catches for 8 straight years. That's good, right? Just give me 50, 60 catches, give me 6 to 8 touchdowns. He's not going to be wide receiver 1.
Right.
But he's going to be a key member of the receiver room, specifically in the red zone.
For sure. And we don't know what he's going to end up as, especially because even when Keon Coleman talked about his post-injury, he was like, well, the offense was rolling without me, so they couldn't really just go right back to feed Keon. And he took a step back in that offense as predicted because the offense was doing so well. And he was selfless enough to say, hey, let the offense be what it is now, and I will just kind of get mine where mine is. So even that attitude in itself is great. So we could see 80 to 10-50 and 6 touchdowns. That's a ceiling that's full on possible. So
cool. Well, we are here because I think I have a gift where I can predict what Buffalo's going to draft next year, just looking at the roster. And wanted to chat about it with you two, and it's always way better to do this live than it is like over Twitter. But if you guys were to like look at the contract situation for Buffalo, do you guys both agree that we have 2 receiver contracts that are expiring next year, right? Between Palmer and Moore, we only have 3 receivers under contract for 2026. Is that the way that you guys see it as well?
For people who are going to be contributors, I would say so. No, without any like growth from some of the UDFA or practice squad guys, or maybe the 7th round pick this year. There are some players that could grow into that role, but for guys who are currently slated to help the offense this year and then be on the roster next year under contract, yeah, I would agree with that.
Randall, how about you? Is that the way you see it too?
Yeah, Curtis Samuel obviously could be a cut candidate before the 2026 season, but if we don't, then he is on our roster for the 2026 season, depending on what Brandon Beane does, and that would probably be along the lines of does he get injured this year is probably the predicate.
Yep. So my first prediction is that Buffalo's drafting a wide receiver next year, and they're drafting it high. Like, it could be Julio Jones high.
Like trade up high?
Like if a receiver grades out that way, like, so if I'm looking at the Bills wide receiver room, if we have Coleman and we have Shakir, what type of receiver would you add to the room? Like, does it have to be a Z? Does it have to be an X? Does it, right? Like, what kind of receiver do you think would be added to the room?
I would go with a Z personally, or I would go with an outside X. Hopefully with Palmer and Elijah Moore being able to split some outside duties, that Keon gets into a power slot role, and then we can find a true X in the 2026 draft. Or there's a good amount of Z options that stayed this year to stay in school and will be declaring next year. But Owen, what do you think?
Yeah, I think what I'm looking at, comparing them to an NHL. Sorry, I was watching the Leafs Sens game.
They just won. Finally advanced in first round. Sorry, go ahead.
So, so comparing him to like a current NFL player, what I'm looking for is that Jerry Jeudy type Z receiver who is more quick, has that separation ability, quick separation, is more of an outside receiver than the slot, but still wins in the same way a typical slot receiver will with quick cutting routes. The typical route running separation getter that you've heard a lot of Bills fans want, because you have X-type body types with Keon and to some extent Jordan Palmer already on roster. And while Palmer is projected to be more of that route-winning type player, we haven't seen much of that yet, and you want to be able to plan for when he's gone in the future and having another player who's young, who can fill that role, who can progress with Keon post that. So I would say someone who wins with routes, someone who can play on the outside specifically, and doesn't necessarily have to be someone who wins as a jump ball player or wins after the catch, because you already have those kind of elements on your roster with Khalil Shakir and Keon. But you want their number one thing to be winning with routes, hands, quickness, stuff like that.
Do you guys have a size profile and a speed profile in mind?
Not size profile, but I don't think it needs to be short or tall sort of thing. Just maybe a little bit lengthy, like a little longer arms for that contested catch point. But no, not. I mean, speed wise, probably since there was like 10 wide receivers that broke 4.40, probably under 4.42 would be ideal.
Yeah, I think outside of what I'm about to say, the under 4.42 is your goal there, just to have some extra speed. Maybe under 4.40 specifically, just get that 4.3 speed on the outside. And then I like to look at a guy like Matthew Golden this year, who is basically who I'm describing for the type of prospect I wanted at 5'11", 191, 190 plus, 5'11", 6 foot, and then like we were saying, like a 4.3 speed, and then has that quickness on top of being able to tag down the field.
Okay. And then do you think Buffalo, with the way that they construct the roster, would draft and keep 2 receivers? Or do you think it's bring in a free agent that's going to be wide receiver 5 so that the guy that you draft will be wide receiver 4 or better? Or do you think you would draft 2 receivers with one of them being in the top 4 and then the 5th receiver being the special teams guy? How do you guys see the roster makeup, or could you predict what you think Brandon Beane would do?
I think with the wide receiver 5, we're talking that same role they had last year. I mean, we always go back to it now with how well it worked out. But with Matt Collins this year with the wide receiver 5, we went after kind of this more veteran presence, a guy who knows his role, understands what he has to do, and they've brought in guys like that in the past. These kind of lower end veterans for lower end deals, and then they're around for like maybe a year, maybe they come back for a second contract, but most of the time they're 1 year deals. You bring that guy in because he's already established at the NFL level, and you know what he brings. Whereas a rookie, there may be situations where they're coming in, you project them to be one thing or the other, and then they come in and they play a totally different role for your offense because they're a different player at the NFL level than they were at the college level. Especially when you're looking towards later round draft picks, there's much more high variance there. If you want someone who's going to come in and do a specific role well and maybe not have progress past that, so they're not stealing away touches from your more highly drafted rookie receiver in the offense itself, it might be smarter to go with the veteran option there.
What do you think, Randall?
Yeah, I think that is like prototypical of Brandon Beane and what he does, sort of to bring that veteran. But I'd be curious to see. He's been kind of changing a little bit of his style, and I'd be wondering if they would double dip, especially with Shakir being definitely a veteran in 2026 to learn off of. Josh Allen being the only captain that, they'll probably add more captains, but Josh Allen really taking the leadership point at that point. So do you need a veteran guy? And even getting Matt Collins, like he was a veteran, and he's like best case scenario when we found Matt Collins and what he did for us sort of thing. So I'd be curious to see if they're kind of leaning on our extensions to be the leaders and then drafting.
Yeah, so my thought is this, a little bit backwards. I don't know that Khalil Shakir's skill set ages well. Right, like he's a rack and a gadget guy. His average depth of target is relatively low, to the point where I would be like, really soon, whoever is going to replace Shakir, my opinion is that player's drafted in the next 2 years.
2027 makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. So if it's not next year, it would be the year after.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
For me, the number one, like if I had to predict right now, the first pick that Brandon Beane makes next year is for an alpha wide receiver.
Yeah. I mean, pretty much what Owen was describing was like, Barian Brown just went to LSU. Like, give me Barian Brown. Good field stretcher, 5'11", 180, probably a 4.4 speed, and was killing it in Kentucky until he went to LSU. And,
And we know
he's a great field stretcher.
Buffalo has scouted Kentucky the last 2 years.
Yeah. Boom.
So, yeah, because we covered Barry and Brown for scouting reports before he went back to school. So,
and I love Barry and Brown.
Antonio Williams, Clemson, right?
Yeah.
Would be another one.
Yeah.
But,
he's more like
Jim,
Curtis Samuel.
Jim, do you think so? Because Shakir is our slot receiver right now, and I don't know if him in particular can progress to being like the more stereotypical slot where like your Cole Beasley, where he wins with route running. I'm not sure he can evolve into that, so I would be closer to your same boat when it comes to he might not grow into that and what could be gone after this next contract's up, maybe even before it's over, just because you don't think his skill set may age super well. But at the same time, do you not think, for me personally, I think current players they have on the roster have some of that multiplicity when it comes to playing inside and out. Like Keon could be a power slot for you. Jordan Palmer played a lot of the slot in the with the Chargers. The type of player we're describing, like I said, I'm going to go back to my comparison with Matthew Golden. He's a player who could have played in the slot in the NFL, still can for the Packers. So you can draft a guy that, is going to be an alpha outside player. But at the same time, you can also draft somebody who, despite winning on the outside, being that outside guy for you, can eventually develop into being more of the slot option down the road and have like a true elite slot receiver, a la Amon-Ra St. Brown, who could be your number one receiver while also playing from the slot as they slowly work Khalil Shakir out of the offense.
Yeah.
Was there a question or was it a statement?
Oh, I was more saying, how do you feel about them having the plan already on the roster, like the player already on the roster to take over Shakir's spot when he leaves? Sorry, I've got to wrap that around.
So I think Brandon Beane does this better than the fan base gives him credit for, right? Because realistically, we could have gone into the season with the defensive line that we had, right, prior to the draft. The draft just gives us reassurance that the defensive line next year is going to be okay, right? So the outlook for the 2026 defensive line is significantly better because of the draft class we had. But I don't necessarily know that the impact of the draft on 2025 is going to be as high as everybody's saying it is. Right? Like Deion Walker, it would not shock me to see him on IR all year.
Yeah, I think he's on it consistently as the Bills GM because, like in the past with the Dorian Williams pick, you've had picks, consistently where the draft class. I remember seeing a graphic from a Bills fan site on Instagram, and it was like grading Brandon Beane's draft classes, trying to claim that he was a bad drafter, and a lot of them was like, okay, the first round picks have done fine, Ed Oliver, Tre'Davious White, Josh Allen, Tremaine Edmonds. And a lot of these, they've just been missing on a bunch of these later day 3 picks. And then, he was like, they were like, oh, he was good at it originally, and now he's been falling off. But then I'm sure if they made the same graphic now, going back to the ones that were just recently made, those day 3 guys are becoming players in the system. So they're not finding like the home run, like George Kittles in the 5th, who are instant starters. But what they're doing is they're doing what you're supposed to do with your day 3 picks. You're grabbing guys who eventually, or in even day 2 picks, coming down the pipeline, become starters for you, get that second contract when they're first starting to become starters for you, like a Dorian Williams next season is going to get a new contract. And then they become consistent starters on that second pro contract after they've been drafted and marinated behind guys. Because when you have such a good roster, you can stand to add developmental depth every year and project your roster out 4 years in the future and understand like this guy's going to be a hit. We just need to wait on it.
Yeah. And when Randall and myself, and I believe there were a few others that were on that podcast, we analyzed the roster construction prior to the AFC Championship game. Anybody that thinks Brandon Beane is a bad drafter, with all due respect, you're an idiot. Like, I'm willing to say it, right? And here's why. Out of the Final 4 NFL teams, Brandon Beane drafted more starters than Howie Roseman. He drafted more starters than Leach in Kansas City. Drafted more starters than the Commanders did. And it wasn't by one. This is by more than, like, I think it was Buffalo had 18, and I think the Chiefs were either at 16 or 15. The Eagles were at 16 or 15. And if I have to go pull up the spreadsheet or if anybody wants the data, I would be happy to show you. And that also assumed that Keon Coleman was not a starter. So if Keon Coleman was a starter, that number gets bumped up one. Because I counted Amari Cooper as the starting wide receiver, not Keon Coleman when I did that math. So Brandon Beane does a good job of drafting starters. What Brandon Beane doesn't do a good job of is drafting all pros and Hall of Famers. And it's okay to laugh at that. Right. But that's really the difference between the Bills and the Chiefs to me. Is the Chiefs have
him and every GM in the league.
Right.
But Owen, you brought up a good point. So I think another position Buffalo's going to draft next year is linebacker. We have Spector, who's going to be a free agent. We have Milano, who is a free agent. So do you think linebacker is on the radar for Buffalo in the 2026 draft?
We expected one this year for starters. I thought with the Milano going into a 1 year and, visits with Chris Paul Jr. and stuff that they were seriously, and even going to the UCLA Pro Day and the Cal Pro Day for Teddy I and things like that. Definitely thought that Buffalo was going to take a linebacker this year. So it's a kind of necessary to either attack it in the offseason or go through the draft.
Yeah, I felt like a lot of the conversations we had this past draft cycle was more so grab a guy that we all saw as being someone who could push Baylon Spector for a rush spot and then maybe potentially become a long-term piece like we've been talking about some of these other guys. So I don't know if maybe they didn't go pull that trigger because they knew they drafted Ulufoshio and they grabbed Joe Andreessen last year, so they didn't really need another developmental guy on the same cycle as they are, and they do like Spector apparently. So I don't think they were really looking towards linebacker as much as we were this year. They may have been for the right price, but when they got jumped by the Rams for Paul, at that point it was over. And for next season though, with Baylon Spector being a free agent, I'm sure they could get him back on a very cheap deal, and they seem to like him a lot as a special teamer. He just can't stay healthy. So even if I can foresee him coming back on a cheap deal, I can also see Matt Milano leaving and then being one of those players that ends up rounding back, coming to the Bills further down in his career once he just searches for his options with becoming a starter for a different team in a different role. I don't see his career continuing to grow as he gets older and still recovering from those major injuries. So which sucks because he's my favorite player. But so I can see him leaving. I can see maybe them bringing Spector back, but for me, they might be banking on Dorian Williams and filling that starting spot. And then they have, again, Ulufoshio and Andreessen as developmental guys behind both of them. So I don't know if linebacker would be a super high priority for them. Maybe another special teams player who could develop maybe and push Andreessen for that primary backup spot. But I could also see that being a veteran they add because they want someone there to push him, especially if Spector isn't back and Spector isn't the guy taking that spot from Andreessen as a primary backup.
So, Randall, where are you on Spector and his value to the roster beyond year 4?
I'm pretty much on Owen's side. I think it's if it's cheap deal, kind of like how DeMar Hamlin, let him test free agency and then check out the contract and offer him what it would be for a depth piece on our team. And then if he finds a bigger contract at a different team, then good for him sort of thing.
Yeah. So I don't think Buffalo drafts 2 linebackers next year, but I do think they will draft 1. So one of the questions that I would have is what type of linebacker, because Spector and Milano are not really the same linebacker, right? They play the same position, but they don't really play it the same way. So if you had to pick an archetype for a linebacker for Buffalo, what do you think it is?
So Spector, he's the primary backup, I think, for Bernard in the middle there. And then for weak side, you have Dorian, again, projecting further in the future once Milano's gone. Dorian, and then potentially Andreessen as your weak side. He's probably more of a middle as well. So it'd probably be Ulufoshio. I think they would probably go for another one of those matchup style, and even without that, even without looking at the typical middle linebacker, weak side linebacker archetypes, the Bills have shown with having Terrell Bernard and Matt Milano be their designated starters that they're totally comfortable playing two matchup weaker side linebackers on the same field at the same time with how aggressive their D tackles are with gap shooting, let them to work the mess in front of them and make them right, and not have to be kind of a stack and shed players. So I would expect a player like we saw with Pupal this year, or even like a Sean Dolak, or some of these other smaller guys who aren't super lengthy and aren't going to stack and shed blocks. That's probably they're going to default to grabbing one of those guys, because even if they do have a pathway for one of those guys to eventually start as a middle linebacker, they've shown that even their middle linebackers still fit that mold with of being more matchup, non-contact players.
Randall, how about you? What kind of linebacker do you think Buffalo would be facing?
No, I pretty much agree. I don't think I think Owen makes a great point that the weight and the size kind of doesn't really matter. They're more interested in IQ and being able to read and react, and just having the smarts in him for it and the leadership role. So really, I don't think it does matter. I think it will be something like the Pupal sort of situation and look in that kind of department. So I agree. Owen said it well.
Yeah. So, and I think Joe Marino also pointed this out on Locked On Bills about the fact that Pupal and Terrell Bernard, their body types are almost clones of each other, kind of thing. So I think that goes to say, like, Buffalo's not looking for that traditional large Mike linebacker. They would prefer to have the matchup linebacker. And then I guess the next position on the list would be safety. So Buffalo has two safeties that will be free agents at the end of 2025. Is that the way? I don't have the roster breakdown, but Owen, you were the one that did the roster breakdown before the podcast, right?
Yeah.
So is that how your math ended up too? That you saw two safeties that were going to be free agents at the end of the season?
So yeah, every year they come into it with four safeties, and not including players that are practice squad, futures reserve contracts. They're going to have two guys under contract following this season. One of the players I think that is coming off of contract that may play himself into getting a second one would be Derek Forrest, depending on how he impacts his defense. He could also be on the Taylor Rapp plan, where he isn't a starter year one, but becomes kind of like that third safety they roll out. Not so much a Cam Lewis player where it was a slot hybrid, big slot, big nickel type player, but more traditional like third safety when they run some of more of those looks specifically, where they want him to be the deep guy. So I think he may earn himself another contract, especially because he was a starter for a Ron Rivera defense, and the only reason why he didn't keep starting in Washington was they switched defensive systems when Dan Quinn took over. So I could see him becoming an early favorite for the Bills and being a developmental guy to eventually take over and be the long-term plan as the safety duo with Cole Bishop in their dream scenario. So I think if they're going to take a safety, they might take another player that is going to be a Jaquan Johnson type developmental special teams player, maybe someone who will push Derek Forrest, but I don't think that's going to be a high investment pick.
So Randall, how about you? Do you think Buffalo will need a safety at the end of the 2025 season?
I do. I do like, to Owen's credit, I do like Derek Forrest in a free safety position because we don't have a lot of free safeties on our roster. Realistically, you got Rapp Hamlin that's way better in the box than in their coverage. And then Cole Bishop's in his second year, so kind of to be determined, especially when he had an injury early in the year. So I think they might use capital to pair up Bishop with a draft pick, and it might be in the top 100, but it would be dependent on how Derek Forrest does. I do think that he could do well, and I do agree with Owen that he could get a second contract, but also we could potentially, Taylor Rapp is a cut candidate after next year. We save $3.3 million on that, so we could even get rid of him too, and then maybe run Derek Forrest and a draft pick and Cole Bishop. So I think that they might, especially with Brandon Beane valuing DBs, especially safeties, they might use another higher capital to pair up with Cole Bishop.
And so what kind of safety profiles to pair with Bishop?
So when I watched him at Utah last year, I thought he did his best work as a strong safety, closer to the line of scrimmage, buzzing down, attacking the run. So I felt like the combination of him and Rapp always confused me because I felt they were two similar players. And that's what I think has kept the safety room holding back so far, is they haven't really had the true, like, complementary players that they had when they had Hyde and Poyer, where Poyer was more of your strong safety, buzz down player. Hyde was more of your roaming free safety type. That's why I have optimism for Derek Forrest, because Derek Forrest and Cole Bishop's skill sets play off each other really well. But then after that, like DeMar Hamlin and Taylor Rapp, if he does continue, I do agree he could be a cut candidate next year, depending on how Forrest looks and if he's ready to take over a starting spot as well as Cole Bishop. I think they need to go with more of a free safety player, especially because they have kind of the big slot type already down between Jordan Hancock and Cam Lewis. They have a glut of strong safeties. They need someone outside of Derek Forrest and to push Derek Forrest to be more of that free safety body type.
100%.
Anything to add to that, Randall?
He did it perfectly. Unless we trade up for Caleb Downs next year. and then we'll figure it out, right?
that would debunk the first half of the podcast when we trade up for a wide receiver. So,
try to kill me with that one.
So Bill's squad talked about running back a little bit today. And next year, Buffalo has Ray Davis and Ty Johnson under contract for 2026. So obviously there's a huge, I know Randall and I have gone back and forth with extend James Cook or not, and I'm an anti second contract to running back. I would not have extended Ty Johnson. Right? Like I would have put a rookie there so that when Cook walks, there's two veteran running backs on the team. That's how I would have done it, but there's a reason I'm not in charge. If you guys had to kind of, like Randall, if you had to think about it, the type of running back that Buffalo would look for, would you try to find a 3-down back to replace Cook, or describe a running back that would replace Cook?
No, I would. I really like Ray Davis, and I think he's responded well to our system, and especially with the community as well. So I think he's on the ups, and I think he's going to have a really good 2025 season. So really, I would just like something to emulate. I would look to emulate something along the lines of just James Cook's outside speed when we run duos, and he has that one-on-one. My favorite thing about James Cook is being able to bounce outside and beat him around the bend. And I'm not sure that Ray Davis can do that. And I know that Ty Johnson's not that great either at that. So I would just like somebody a quick, fast outside run guy that can help in the speed department, while Ray Davis is more of a bruiser and Ty Johnson is that pass catching, do it all third down back. Owen, what do you think?
Yeah, so I'm a huge Ray Davis fan. He was my RB1 coming out of that class that year. So nice. I was in love with Ray Davis. And I think the re-signing of Ty Johnson, I'm closer to you, Jim, than farther about the lack of second contracts for running backs. But I think that I'm more so for starters that have a ton of the wear and tear put on their bodies. Like a Ty Johnson, who plays limited snaps and has a specific role and excels at that doesn't really fall off with a ton of wear and tear and body degradation. I think you can afford to give him a second contract, especially at $3 million per year. I was fine with that. But so to complement that skill set, if you're not bringing Cook back at a reasonable price, you definitely need to replace the speed element there. I don't know if that means it needs to be someone who is now a complementary back to Ray Davis that who I think could be the guy who eventually steps in. Again, I think super highly of Ray Davis, who steps in and becomes more of your primary starter, bruiser, heavy contact balance. So I think he could be. You need someone who could complement him versus replacing James Cook as an entirety, because I think you're going to move towards him as your starter already in the plans. I also don't think he's the best when it comes to like just pure pocket moving and power there. So I could also see them maybe looking for somebody who has some more size, like a Latavius Murray, like they brought him in the past, to be more of a pile mover. I also don't know if how he's looked in positions, because Ray Davis has looked good in some of those spots as well. I just never thought he could be an elite player when it came to that level of power in the NFL, just because of his lack of overall size. So If he can show out that, I think they only need to hit on the speed element to complement Ray and Ty. But at the same time, I also think they could end up adding another power element. But I mean, that could also fall on the fullbacks. That could fall on Josh Allen as a quarterback runner. I don't really see them pushing the power element too much as they're going to want to hit the speed element as soon as James Cook's out of the building.
Mm-hmm.
So describe the speed. Like, what was James Cook's speed coming out of school from Georgia? When we say speed element, how fast does that need to be?
For me, when watching it, I wasn't a big James Cook fan coming out of Georgia. I thought he was a receiving back that had speed, and that was kind of a lot of what he's going to be banking on. I didn't foresee him to be the player he is now. Compared to when he was in college coming out, he was one of those guys that smooth accelerator, could hit the outside boundary, and that's why he was so good as a receiving back, is because they got him in the screen game a lot. They got him out wide in the slot, running drags to try to get him in space. And one of those players that when they're in the open field, despite being, pushing 190, 195, and you're going against DBs that are 170, you have that extra gear that you can beat out angles of tacklers to finish plays off. A lot of the speed that we talk about is just speed to finish that last 20 yards of the play. That's what I'm looking for, because you have a lot of guys on your roster already in Ray Davis and Ty Johnson who can excel in that inside the 20 from the line of scrimmage burst explosiveness, but you don't have that guy on your roster that has that last gear they can hit to break plays long and threaten to hit the boundary, and then any play could be a touchdown kind of thing.
Yeah, he had a 4.42 speed, a 1.56 10 yard, and over a 10-foot broad for explosion purposes. So that's quick.
Yes, and Brandon Beane even said something to the effect of, during this offseason, that when they drafted Cook, he was there to be a pass receiving back. So Buffalo spent a second-round pick on a pass receiving running back kind of thing. So do you guys think that Davis can be a 50% of the touches, 50% of the snaps running back going into year three?
They love Ty Johnson as that third down back, whether it's pass blocking or receiving. I think Ray Davis is a better receiver than James Cook is, because even though he was pegged as more of a receiving guy coming out of college, James Cook has shown issues with drops and just not being the most consistent receiver out of the backfield, and as well, he's a terrible pass blocker. So he's not hit that 50% because he hasn't been able to stay on the field with pass reps. So I think even though Ty Johnson is going to eat into it, I like Ray Davis a lot more as a pass protector and as a consistent receiver out of the backfield. He has great hands. He's not the broadest guy. He doesn't have the greatest wingspan, so you don't want him to be your consistent receiving option. But I think the fact that he has more natural running back receiving skills and pass down skills than a James Cook did makes him a potential candidate to hit that 50% snap count.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. And, Ty Johnson doesn't have the arms either, but they had a lot of catches, 10 plus yards, like Ray Davis's 35-yard catch that he had. And Ty Johnson was just so consistent in the passing game to where I don't think that really will play in that much of a factor. But I think Ray Davis could do it if he needed to. But I think you're right, Owen. I think that they don't want him to, because they re-signed Ty Johnson, and Ty Johnson's just so consistent that he should be an outlier for another contract.
A lot of where James Cook lost some snaps too was towards the end of games and later in the halves, when you need someone to pick up some gritty yardage. James Cook's a slashing type running back. He has that speed, and he's sub 200 pounds. And that's the trade-off, is that you're not going to get a guy who's going to move the pocket or bounce off contact and play through contact all that well. So when they got 2 points in the game where they needed someone that, even if the line of scrimmage gets messy, they still need those 2 yards, Ray Davis and Ty Johnson came in as the closing type backs, as well as being those passing down backs. So that's where James Cook, I felt he could have been a 50+ percentage snap taker, but they just liked the skill set those other two brought in those specific scenarios, and they had those guys on the roster already, so why not play into it? So a guy like Ray Davis, if he was the starter, I think could easily play all through those situations, as well as still staying on the field as a passing back, and could easily get over 50%.
Okay. So another 2026 position to keep our eye on is interior offensive line.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I can see by 2027 that Buffalo has 2 new starters at guard and a new starter at center than what we're entering 2025 with. Between, do we have the money to extend Torrance? McGovern, when he was on Cover One, said that he may not be back because they might be trying to groom Van Pran Granger.
Yeah.
And then David Edwards is a cut candidate this year. But even if he's not cut this year, I believe his contract expires at the end of 2026 anyway, right?
Yeah, he's not a good cut candidate, but he is up in 2026 because I think we lose money on a cut.
Okay. I did not realize that we lost money on a cut.
He was a good cut candidate. It was like pre-March something. He would save us money, but then we decided not to, so it's no longer viable.
Okay.
Yep. Better to just play it out, even if he sits on the bench.
Okay, so if you guys had to identify an Aaron Kromer interior offensive lineman, like what does that player look like? Because I think that would be high on the draft needs for 2026.
I'm not too keen on prototypical guards on the interior offensive line, to be honest with you. But I mean, Kromer is one of the best running back offensive line coaches in the league. So it's kind of in Kromer we trust in my head. I'm not sure what his trends on prototypical size and style is, though. Oh, and do you have anything?
From what they've drafted since he's been there, it's been kind of all over the map. So I think they're willing to bring in different body types and allow them to work off and be more of a we plan for what we have versus we have a plan. Let's fill it with players we want for that plan.
Yes.
Yeah, and I do think, like, similar to what you both just said, right? Grable and Van Pran Granger are not the same body types.
Right.
But it's, can we design the offense around the skill sets of those two guys? Can we make those two guys play with each other? So how high do you think Buffalo would draft an interior offensive lineman? I mean, we took Torrance in round 2. Do you think Buffalo would spend a high premium pick on an interior lineman?
I think they could go as early as a day 2 pick. Center, I'm a bit concerned about center just because McGovern was like a top 5 center in the league last season. And while I'm a big Cedric Van Pran Granger fan, like going top 5 to an unproven player who's been developing, I don't know how comfortable I am with that. So I don't know if I'd be willing to pay. I'd be willing to pay McGovern over paying Torrance personally. But for me, I don't think that's where they're going to draft. If they're going to draft someone high, I think they're going to go guard specifically just because they're going to want someone who can either come in and compete for the right guard spot with David Edwards immediately or be the eventual successor to Torrance when he leaves and they get picked back and you kind of just keep refreshing there. And having done, we did the D tackles and interior line for the draft professor this past draft cycle, Newton and I did, and a ton of the guards went back. So I'm looking at like an Armaj Reed Adams. That's my guy.
I knew that you were going to mention him.
I absolutely love him. He's like 320 and can move. So I think a player who needs some technique cleaned up and showed us some athleticism, play tackle in a pinch. That's kind of, they also love versatility, which is what makes the SVGP or PG pick kind of confusing when they first made it, but I think they had the outlook of maybe moving on from McGovern down the road, so they just picked their best center candidate. So I think if you're going to look at any one piece of a prospect that the Bills really covet, it's going to be that versatility, and I think a guy like Reed Adams would be my favorite going into it.
Yeah. Randall, have you seen Reed Adams?
I think I maybe watched a game or two, but I did not watch him entirely, and then obviously he'll be on my summer.
Owen got excited. Like that was, I think that may have been Owen's second podcast, right? That was really early. Like draft professors, did we even know what we were doing at the time? Like we didn't even have these cool shirts yet.
It was like October, and I was losing my stuff over like him against LSU and him against Alabama. He had such good games, and I was just like, oh. And then he went back to school, and I was like, damn it.
You already got him scouted. Now you can just wait until 2024 hits and then just watch him cook.
Yep. So I guess before we close out, Owen, would you like to introduce yourself to the people watching and let them know who you are and how they can find your other content.
Yeah, so I currently work as a scout for the University of Buffalo football team, Division I program at the FBS level. So this is my kind of passion project afterwards. I'm here with Jim. Hopefully, we're going to continue this come the fall on Wednesday nights. And then also we have some stuff in plans for over the summer as well for me and Jim. So you can find me on this channel on these live streams. As well, me and Randall are going to be recording tomorrow night talking about the Bills draft class. I just got done talking about the Packers draft class with fellow draft professor Newt Weston, who I may or may not have on a little more frequently. Then we'll see how that develops. But yeah, over at Weekly Huddle on YouTube, that's kind of generating some more content now, and as well Twitter at Weekly Huddle. So that's where you can find a lot of my work.
Awesome. Randall.
And yeah, at Randall Slifer, Twitter or Blue Sky, both the same names. And then I do almost all my podcasting with Jim over at Draft Professors, doing the same thing in the summer, getting very excited for summer scouting. Just getting into the next year, probably about 2 weeks, I'll start my summer scouting and start honing in on that. But then I also write for teammbsmedia.com. If you want to check that out, I do particularly Arkansas Razorbacks and Buffalo Bills, but I do everything in between, pretty much all college and some TV and entertainment and stuff like that. So you can check out some articles there. And I'm also with the NFL Draft Central with Team MBS as well.
Cool. And you can follow the channel at NFL Draft Fanatic. No, I am Fanatic. We have daily draft content coming at you. Last night, we had an agent on that was actually pretty cool. I learned a lot from talking with the agent. But anyways, daily draft content, most of the content for the next 3 to 4 months will be one of two things. It will be people like Owen and Randall and many other draft professors talking about which players they've watched and specifically which ones that they like that they've watched, as we're building about a 300-player board to begin scouting reports. In addition to that, we're going to be doing some NFL content. Owen is going to be doing that with Josh on Wednesday nights, where they're going to be going through what schemes are teams running, what do the depth charts look like for each NFL team. And I believe next Wednesday, we're starting with the Bills and the Ravens. So, and then you'll also be able to see EJ and Bob do it on Thursday night. So there's going to be Owen and Josh doing that on Wednesdays, EJ and Bob doing it on Thursdays, and we'll get through all 32 NFL teams that way.
Nice.
That being said, do you guys see any other, let's say, 2026 roster needs that we haven't talked about yet?
Let's see.
I think edge is the only other one that
Edge.
comes to mind, right? We have two edges that are going to be free agents.
It'll be dependent on kind of Bosa, to be honest with you. With the 1-year deal on Bosa, I'd like to see how that works out. Because he's on a prove it, let's say he ends up re-signing and actually coming back because he did so well and likes Buffalo. That is probably a catalyst of how much of a need our edge style is. And Javon Solomon. I mean, I do hope that Javon Solomon does pull something out in 2025 to remain in the depth chart, but we'll see how that goes too.
I'd also point out, so I have two other spots. One would be potentially a punter, like long-term answer there. They've consistently had, Tyler Bass is locked in as the kicker. Maybe that's something they end up moving on from as well. I know there was a lot of talk this past offseason, but he had a bounce-back year to cover that. So I'm sure they have some specialist stuff they're looking into, but that's not super pressing or important. You can also always hit free agency or UDFA market for that. For draft specifically, I think we're still not totally resolved with this D tackle situation because following this season, Daquan Jones is a free agent, Larry Ogunjobi is a free agent, and you have the four guys between Oliver, Carter, Deontay Walker, and TJ Sanders now as your rotational four. And they usually like to keep in past seasons. I did the numbers on how they like to construct a roster over the past 5 years. And on average, they're keeping 4.3 D tackles on the roster. So that could be your four. But I think a lot of it comes down to performance of Dwayne Carter this year. I think Ed Oliver's a made man. The other two guys, Deontay Walker might not even play a lot this year just because of his lower back rehab. And trying to slowly progress him more and more. So that could be a spot where you're waiting and seeing with him. But Dwayne Carter, if he doesn't take a significant step up in his production in year 2, and they are, I'm curious to see what they do with fit, and we'll talk about this a little more tomorrow on our show, Randall, about his fit on the along the D line. That where does he play? And if he can't really figure that out this year, it's not going away with Oliver and TJ Sanders both being on the roster for the foreseeable future. Is he another player that's candidate for trading or just falling into kind of losing snaps to someone else they may look to bring in?
For sure. And he'll have that opportunity, which, again, we'll talk again more tomorrow because I don't want to ruin any of that. But, yeah, I mean, it's interesting to see Brandon Beane and how he's going to handle Dwayne Carter, because he already went on the podium saying if he's not going to play 3-tech, he'll play 1-tech. If he's not going to play 1-tech, he'll play 3-tech. So he'll probably have the snaps to do it, but I hope that he's able to evolve into the versatility more and be able to adapt so that he can kind of hold his own. But you are right. Dwayne Carter is another question mark that could leave defensive tackle open in 2026 to be able to fill that need.
So one of my defensive tackle concerns, like I like that you guys called it out, is that we have 2 projects at defensive tackle, Walker and Carter. Right? And we saw Bean hold on to Basham probably a year too late. Right?
A year, what, 1 year?
I'm trying to, yeah.
Yeah. Okay,
well, no. But you're right. We could have said 2 years. Like we could have said the same thing about Cody Ford, right?
Yeah. I have the same exact feeling with Boogie Basham as I do Cody Ford.
Yeah. So my question with defensive tackle would be, what happens if Carter doesn't take the jump?
Yeah.
And we know that we have to give Walker 2 years. Like, I'm not going to make any assessments on Walker 12 months from now.
No.
But after year 2, I might.
Right.
Yeah.
So the problem to me would be, we're only going to carry 5 defensive tackles, with Oliver and Sanders being 2 of the 5.
Yeah.
So to me, there is I don't know. It's like the same problem. Like Bean, after he drafted Basham, did not draft an edge for 3 years. I don't want him to wait 3 years to draft another defensive tackle.
I don't think so. I don't think that's going to happen, especially with how the game's evolving and how the trenches are now exponentially more important, even though they always were. But I guess it's now getting recognized that they're still more important, sort of thing. So I think that defensive tackle may be another thing where it's probably even almost every year. If not, then you skip a year and then make sure you get another one next year. So I think I think the way the game's evolving, it's just necessary to do it.
Owen, how about you? How do you read that?
That's kind of what we were discussing when you stepped away, was like, what D tackle is a position where you're concerned about development time and how quickly they can impact your roster. So if you're going to be waiting on a guy, like we talked about, like you were saying, like with your Boogie Basham, your example, waiting on a guy like that when you already have a room that's struggling to find guys who are going to be projected starters moving forward is going to be something you don't want to really mess around with. Now, they might add another veteran like Larry Ogunjobi like they did this year.
Mm-hmm.
They've always looked to add to that room every season, whether it's through free agency or the draft. So even though they haven't drafted guys consistently, they've consistently signed people like Daquan Jones, and they've brought in guys in the past to kind of be Band-Aids when it comes to being, covering for younger players not developing properly or fast enough. So I could see them drafting another one as soon as next draft, or I could see them waiting another 2 years, waiting to see what they got from the current crop of guys. And then if the Dwayne Carter and or Deone Walker and or TJ Sanders doesn't pan out, you then have to, we're back in the same position now that we were going into this past draft, where it's like, okay, we're double dipping at D tackle. We need bodies. What's the projected class looking like, 2027, 2026?
Yeah, and this is a much longer discussion that maybe we can do, which Owen will probably talk about tomorrow. But the way they're building the defensive line is another discussion to be had, which it's going to be probably formations and lineups are going to be a lot different than what we saw in the past 4 years with the amount of versatility. Like we could almost run a 3-4 base with the versatility that we have on the line now. So it'll be interesting to see how we approach the defensive line this year, and then we have to kind of acknowledge it and realize that we're adjusting.
So if we do a 3-4 base, because that was actually discussed on Bill's squad today.
Was it?
If we did a 3-4 base, who are the 4 players that you would call linebackers? And I'm putting that in air quotes, but you couldn't see it on the camera.
Hoyt, Bosa.
Okay. So Bosa is considered to be a linebacker.
Yeah. That's kind of what the scheme they run in the Chargers. They ran through like so many coaches, so I can't say like any one scheme, but he was a 3-4 outside linebacker in one of those schemes they played. Similar to like Khalil Mack was also a 3-4 outside linebacker for a time there. That would be your number one players there. The guys they have currently who are their edge rushers, like a Greg Rousseau or Landon Jackson or an AJ Epinesa, are much more comfortable being like 5-tech players than stand-up rushers. So the fact they brought in Hoyt and Bosa this offseason makes you think that could they run a couple more of those varied fronts in potentially? I don't know who your true nose tackle is that's going to play to complement that, because that's usually what you have as a 3-4 base is a 0-tech head up with the center who's going to get double and triple teams, and you have 2 5-techs head up on the tackles, and then you have maybe some shifting over with compensating for wherever that rush linebacker is, or sometimes they rush from that second level.
Yep.
Do you see Solomon in that same mold as Hoyt and Bosa?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I forgot about him.
Cool. Well, we've been going at this for an hour. Any final thoughts on, let's say, projecting the 2026 draft for Buffalo?
I don't think we need to worry about them drafting a developmental backup quarterback like we talk about every single year again. I think that's off the board. Stop bringing it up. It's not going to happen.
I like that. So I am going to download this podcast. We will air it right before the Bills draft next year.
Cool.
And like we can even, like the 3 of us, we could probably play it on YouTube and have a watch party of this podcast.
Reaction stream.
Just see how either right or like off of our rocker we were 12 months in advance. So
yeah. And let's put it down, Barry Brown or Antonio Williams as a wide receiver that we draft, just to do it in a full year in advance and see what happens. Throw a dart, because they both make sense. Clemson, they'll look at Clemson as one of the 1 ACC teams they go for. And then obviously Barry Brown was at Kentucky, now at LSU for the SEC. So then just get on that, and then they'll be looking at those 2 guys.
And Clemson's team this year feels very stacked. I'm sure Sam Teets will be happy.
For sure.
Who is this Nick Harbor guy? I'm looking at this list of 2026 receivers. He's a track star DK Metcalf that doesn't know how to play football yet. So as long as he can figure out how to run routes, play football well, he will be like almost DK Metcalf 2.0. He's crazy. Yeah,
he runs a sub 10 100 meter, and he's what 6'5", 6'4", like 220.
He's listed here 6'5", 235, and a projected 4.2 40.
Yeah,
is insane,
right? Just learn how to play football.
Yeah, Jesus.
It's a lot of money. Figure it out.
Cool.
If he figures out football, then yes, Nick Harbor.
Well, I am looking forward to the scouting report discourse. Like, because I just got done building the initial board for the simulator. Looking at the different people, the different players that some of the different draft professors have watched, and I conglomerated something together. But that board is going to churn so much in the next 2 months. This is actually the easiest and the quickest I've ever had a board put together after the draft. And I couldn't do that without draft professors. So if you're a draft professor and you're either on the podcast or listening, thank you.
I've not contributed at all to that, so I'm not part of that.
So I started this podcast because I had to have a way to figure out what players to add to the simulator. Like, no other podcast was giving me enough information to give me the list. So I'm like, okay, well, I know how to make a podcast. I just have to find people to help. So here we are.
There we
But,
go. Last thing before we leave, is it Dione or Dion?
I've heard it both.
Do we know? I've heard both too, and I've always just said Dion because I just assumed, which is always a bad thing to do.
I'm checking to see if they have a pronunciation guide on Kentucky's website.
Nice.
I don't see one.
It's
I've
Dion.
I've heard it. Is it
It is
Dion?
Dion. It is Dion.
According to, what am I looking at? Bing. Dion.
Dion. Okay. All right, we're good. I just want to. Now that he's on our team, I don't want to get it wrong anymore.
That would be important. That
Yeah,
would
right.
definitely be important.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, for Owen, for Randall, for myself, for the 75 podcasters at the Draft Professor, thank you for watching. We'll see you on a podcast again tomorrow. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.